Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 2 of my July wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below, as well as content warnings, links, etc. And let's get into it. So the next book that I finished was It Happened at the Ball, edited by Sherwood Smith. This is a collection of short stories, like an anthology, by a bunch of different authors, and all of them involve or take place at some kind of ball or dance or masquerade, which is a kind of scene that I enjoy. And I'm just gonna look at my Goodreads notes or updates to give you kind of an overview, but overall I did really enjoy this collection. So The Siret Mask by Marie Brennan, I gave 3 stars. I liked the setting, but I didn't like the plot. Just Another Quiet Night at Almack by Marissa Doyle, I really enjoyed that one. That was 4 stars, and it was perfect timing because I was looking to try the author's series that is connected to this story, and I didn't realize that she had done kind of like a teaser, so that was great. Homeworld Stranger by Sarah Stamey, I gave 3 stars. That was like a sci-fi one that was fine. I liked the writing, but I didn't really care much for the premise or the setting, and I think it was an odd choice for this book, this story, and there's one other one, it's an excerpt from a larger work, and I can't help thinking that I would have, I was missing context about things. Kerygma and Waltz Time by Charlotte Goldman, I gave 4 stars. That one was super interesting. It was this really interesting look at the meaning of stories, the power of stories. I loved the discussions about literature and books and storytelling, and the appreciation for fan fiction. I love the focus on Jane Austen, and I'm not sure that I completely love the ending or even understand all of it, but there was a lot of great things about this story, though I didn't love the dig at Regency fantasy. Dancing Banglers by Irene Radford, somewhere between 3 and 3.5 stars. It was fine, and I liked the sister stuff, but I didn't love the hints of unexamined colonialism in that one. A Plague of Dancers by Gillian Pollock, 3.75 to 4 stars, somewhere around there. The story was super interesting. It felt almost dreamlike. The story development was interesting. I really liked Marjorie, who was the main character, and I liked the theme of honoring multiple cultural and religious practices, and just I don't know, very, very interesting story. A Borrowed Heart by Deborah J. Ross, I enjoyed. That one I gave 4 stars, and the only thing I said was unexpected, which it was. One of my favorites was The Gown of Harmonies by Francesca Forrest, which I gave 5 stars. I loved that one. There was sewing magic. I loved the main character. There was a really sweet romance. And I also like how the main character's blindness was incorporated into the story, and it was an important part of the way she navigated the world, but it didn't overtake her character, although I can't speak to the representation. The Dress by Lynn April Brown was only 2 pages, but I gave it 4 stars because it was such a clever and interesting take on Cinderella. And once again, a magic dress, which I love. A Waltz for May by P.G. Nagel, 3 stars. The writing and some of the characters were well done, but this is the other one that was taken an excerpt from a larger story. And I would think that, I don't know, I feel like that maybe did this one a disservice, because I find it weird that I feel like we're supposed to sympathize with the main character's aunt who enslaves people. This is a Civil War historical fiction one, and I assume in the larger novel that is talked about more. Our main character is very obviously anti-slavery, but I just find it weird the way her aunt was written. Sherbet on Silver by P.G. Nagel, between 3.75 and 4 stars, which took an interesting turn, and there was some funny stuff. Guilt and Glamour by Layla Lawler, gave 4 stars. I enjoyed that one a lot. That was a really fun mix of old folklore with a modern spin on it. And then the other favorite story I had was Lily and Crown by Sherwood Smith, which I gave 5 stars. This is one of the only times in my life I actually wish that we had had a map. You guys know I don't like maps in fantasy books. I find them irritating. In this case, I would have actually liked one because I had a little bit of a hard time figuring out what these countries' relations with each other were in terms of geography and diplomacy. But that might have also been my fault because of some mistaken assumptions I made about where this story fit in with the larger world that Sherwood Smith writes in. But I did really love that one. She's just such a talented writer. So anyway, altogether I gave this collection 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too boring to just listen to me talk about all the stories, but I feel like I had some pretty strong feelings about them, so I wanted to. And then next, I finished A Spy in the House by Y.S. Lee. This is the first book in the Agency series, and I'm pretty sure I heard about this series from my friend Hannah at Lynn Hermione, or Ball Gowns and Books. I think she's where I heard about this series from for the first time. And I really enjoyed this. This is a historical mystery. We're following our main character, Mary Quinn, who is rescued from the gallows and taken to Miss Scrimshaw's Academy for Girls. And she's only 12 years old when this happens. And then we follow her a few years later, where she has gotten kind of her first assignment because she ends up not just taking part of the school part, but also realizing that she has the opportunity to be like an investigator, kind of a spy for these women, and to work on different cases. And the women who run this organization recognize the advantage that they have because people continuously underestimate them because they're women, and their operatives are women as well. And so Mary ends up taking on her first case, and that's what we follow. It seems to be related to some kind of like financial shadiness going on with a wealthy family. Like they're suspecting him of fraud, but things end up getting a lot more dangerous than they thought. There are actually some murders that happen, and Mary ends up investigating those along with a companion that she meets. And I really liked this. I really liked Mary as a main character. I really like the themes of this book and the social commentary, and the way that that was really well integrated into the story, like especially about Mary's background and like the colonialism and racism of this time period, and also like, you know, looking at gender and that kind of thing. So I really liked that. I was not a big fan of her companion slash future love interest at the beginning. Like the first couple times we met him, I could not stand him. I really didn't like him, but he really grew on me by the end. I ended up really liking him and Mary together. I also thought the mystery aspect was interesting. I really enjoyed the writing style, and I gave A Spy in the House 4 stars. Next, I finished the Eternity Code graphic novel by Owen Colfer, adapted by Michael Morecci and illustrated by Stephen Gilpin. This is the third in that graphic novel series. It's always hard to summarize later books in this series. So the first one involves Artemis, a young criminal mastermind slash boy genius, who finds out that fairies are real and who kidnaps one to hold them for ransom. And at this point in the series, they grudgingly end up working towards the same goals sometimes. And that's what happens here. There's somebody who gets hold of fairy technology, and Artemis and co have to get that back because there are some really high stakes if they don't. And this is kind of like a heist story in a way, and this is one of my favorite books in the original series, and like I said, I've been really enjoying these adaptations, so of course I had a really good time with this. I continue to really, I personally like the art style, although I do think that some of the new characters introduced in this book, I didn't love the art style for them, but overall, I do like the art. I also think the adapters do a really excellent job of condensing the story in a way that doesn't leave you lost if you haven't read the original books. Obviously there are things they have to shorten or take out, but overall I feel like the adapters have been doing a great job of still creating a cohesive story. Of course, I love these characters. I like the heist elements of this book, but my major complaint for this volume is that I don't think the emotional impact was here in nearly the same way that it was for the Eternity Code novel. And I recognize that graphic novels are a much shorter format and they're a very different format, but in the 2 previous graphic novels, there are some pretty high emotional stakes. I think that the character work was very good. So I think it is possible to do that kind of thing in a graphic novel format, and I just don't think this volume did that for me. There's some stuff near the beginning that it does, but there's some really emotional developments that happen at the end of the book, and they really hit me every time I read that book, and here that just didn't happen. I just don't think the emotional resonance was there. I don't know. So that was disappointing, but I did really enjoy this one. There is a change they make, which I can't say for spoiler reasons, but it's a little thing, but that I think has a pretty significant impact for character arcs, and I wonder why they changed that. But overall, I did really enjoy this. I think it's a good adaptation, and I gave the Eternity Code graphic novel 4 stars. Next, I finished Goldman by Kate Stradling. This is an author who I've been reading a lot of lately and really enjoying. This is also the longest book that I've read from her so far. And this is a retelling of 2 very obscure fairy tales. Let me see. Scurvy Head and Sir Goldenhair. So we're following our main character Duncan, and at the very beginning of the book, his mother has died and his father is really horrible and abusive towards him, and one day Duncan just decides he's had enough and he leaves. He kind of goes off to seek work in another town somewhere and just get away from his father, and along the way he ends up crossing paths with a witch who wants him to come and take care of her estate, and he doesn't really want to, he doesn't really trust her, but she offers to pay him really well, and he's like, well, I would have needed a job anyway, so okay, I'll do it. And so he gets there, and the witch gives him all this work to do, and Duncan doesn't mind because he's really hardworking, and he's also in some ways very not curious because the witch keeps telling him things like, and this door is locked, top secret. You can never, ever, ever open it. Don't open this door. Anyway, here's your keys with the key to this door. And Duncan doesn't open it because he's like, oh, okay, you told me not to. And it's really funny watching the witch continuously try and trap him into doing things, and he just won't because he's just not that kind of person. Which I loved. It was so funny. When she would be like, all right, I'm gonna go leave now. I'm gonna leave you all by yourself. don't open that door. And then she leaves, and then she comes back and she's like, did you open the door? And he's like, no, of course not. Like, it's just so funny. So that's like the first kind of chunk of the book. And then of course things end up progressing from there. Duncan ends up in another kingdom after a while. He also has a magical horse as his companion now who can talk. And he realizes that he is being caught in some political messiness that he didn't know about. So I really enjoyed this one. I love Duncan as the main character so much. Like, he's just so like endearing, and he also, like, a lot of people treat him like he's stupid, and he's obviously not. Like, he thinks of himself as being like not the brightest too, but like he obviously is very smart. He's just very good at like not drawing attention to himself. And like I said, I found it really funny just like watching him. Like, he follows the rules most of the time, and people can't understand that. And I just really love his good heart as well. I also continue to enjoy Kate Stradling's writing. I just like her storytelling, and I'm so impressed at the way that she like crafts all these like details that fit together by the end of the book in a way that is just really, really satisfying. It was also very interesting reading a retelling of fairy tales I didn't know at all, so I didn't really know where anything was going. I do think that there were sections of this book that felt slightly disconnected from each other. There's like the part where he's at the witch's estate, and then there's like a little bit of traveling, and then there's like the kingdom part. But like I ended up being very invested in both of those things, even though I think the first part of this might have been my favorite. But I did still end up really liking the other directions the story went, so that wasn't a big deal. Really my only critiques were there were some places in this book that I felt there was kind of a lull. Like we were waiting around a little bit more than I think we needed to. And again, this book was a little bit long, and I think the only reason it felt long is because we had those kinds of moments where things weren't happening as much. But my bigger problem is that the second, probably more than half of this book, is Duncan is spending a lot of time around people who are really mean to him. Which, because I mean, just in general, that's not a super pleasant reading experience, but also because I love Duncan so much, it wasn't super fun to be around people who just were not treating him well. And like Duncan could hold his own, and like there were still interesting things about the story and like the other characters, but like there's one character in particular who he ends up spending a lot of time with that I just didn't like the way they treated him, and we do get some explanations for it later on, which I think makes sense. And I actually think part of the backstory or the explanations was like really, really clever. But I think that even with that, we didn't need this character to be as antagonistic and unpleasant to Duncan as they were. Also, I do want to mention, and this will be in content warnings as well, but like there are some kind of like there's like scenes where like because of some magical spell things that happen, Duncan or other characters end up like beating horses with a stick. And because of the fairy tale context, I understand why that happened, but I also think because this is a retelling, I think the author could have written that in a way that like didn't need that to happen. So that was just a little jarring because like it kept happening, and obviously Duncan didn't like want to do this, and then he found out there were specific reasons he needed to do this. Basically there were extenuating circumstances, and there were reasons why it didn't feel like in the real world if somebody were like, you know, beating a horse or something. But I just think that was a little unnecessary. But I did enjoy this, and I gave Goldman 4 stars. Next I finished The Smoke Scented Girl by Melissa McShane. This book has a companion sequel, but it mostly reads like a standalone. And this is a vaguely historical flavored fantasy. I've obviously been really enjoying Melissa McShane's books. Also, you can also probably tell that this month was the Indie Accords readathon, because even though I've been reading a lot of indie fantasy in general, I read like a ton of indie fantasy this month, which I'm not mad about. So this is set in the country of Dalanine, who is at war. And our main character is named Evan, and he is a kind of magical, it's like magical R&D almost. And he's really, really, really good at what he does. And he starts noticing these like strange occurrences of these really like intensely powerful fires that start and that usually kill people. And he starts like noticing these because this fire is not like anything he's ever seen. It's magical in nature, and he just doesn't know why this is happening. And he starts tracing it and realizing that there is a person who is like doing this over and over. And then his employers want him to track this person down, who they find out is a woman named Carenza, to try and harness his power for the sake, like for the war effort, basically. And things go from there. And I really enjoyed this. I've pretty much enjoyed everything I read from Melissa McShane, so that's not a surprise. I thought the setting was interesting. I love the way that Melissa McShane writes like magical like magical development, magical details in a way that almost feels like a mystery plot. Like, I love that. I love that kind of detail. I know not everybody does, because I also really enjoyed Wandering Sight, which there was a lot about dream magic there that some people found very dull. I find it fascinating, and I love the way that she writes it. Like, I loved getting to see these pieces gradually come together about what is happening to Kerygma, why this, like, what this spell is, like, why it's doing what it's doing, what's going on. I found that so interesting and just very, very compelling. I also loved Evan as the main character. He is kind of, like, in some ways, he's kind of that, like, character who's so fixated on the work they're doing that they aren't great at socializing, but in a way he's also not, because he'll say things to Kerygma about, like, you know, wanting to do experiments to work on her, like, figure out what her magic is doing. Like, he'll say insensitive things, but he'll, like, immediately realize what he said and feel, like, so bad about it. Like, he's clearly working really hard to not get caught up in his research, you know? So I appreciate that. I also really liked Kerygma. I just found her a very sympathetic and likable character. I was surprised and impressed at how invested I was in her, considering that I think a lot of times when you have a character where there's so much plot stuff connected to them, I think a lot of times it can feel like we don't have as much time for character development, you know, because they're so, like, everything about them is about, like, the plot rather than them as a character. But I didn't feel that with Kerygma. I really felt for her and I really liked her. I also loved Piercy, who is like Evan's friend and kind of second in command. He's the main character of the second book, so I'm really excited about that. I also just found the characters in general very well written. I love the way that legends were talked about in this book, and, like, legends and history and how those things can get mixed up. I love the way this book avoided certain, like, irritating tropes, like the, like, woman scorned thing. Like, Evan has a rival who is a woman that he went to school with, and everybody assumed that basically that they had broken up and that's why they hate each other, and it's not. Which I just love, because, like, in a lot of stories I think that would have been true. The only, like, thing for me that I didn't love with this one was the romance between Evan and Kerygma. Like, I really liked them as characters and I did really like them together, but the intensity of their feelings, like, especially because we're following Evan, so we see it from his side, like, the intensity just felt a little too fast, like, very too fast, actually, considering how little time they spent together. Like, I enjoyed their interactions, but I just wanted a little more from the romance. But overall, I really enjoyed this, and I gave The Smoke Scented Girl 4 stars. Next, I finished Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This was kind of a reread, kind of not, because this is the new traditionally published edition, and this was one of my favorite books last year, so obviously I loved this again. If you want, like, more coherent thoughts about it, I will link my friend Hannah's full review on her blog down below, because she also loved this recently. And this is the first book in the Regency Fairy Tale series, which is a historical fantasy series set obviously in the Regency period, and there are fae involved and other kinds of magic as well. This has become one of my all-time favorite series. I love it so much. In this first book, we are following our main character Dora, who, when she's very young, she gets half of her soul ripped away by a fairy. And so what this means is that she has no sense of fear or embarrassment, which makes navigating society very tricky. And it also means that her emotions can feel kind of muffled for her. And her cousin, who is the one who saved her from getting all of her soul taken away, her cousin and Dora are very, very close. So her cousin Vanessa, she ends up going to London for a season to try and find a suitable match, and she takes Dora with her. And Dora doesn't realize until they're there that the reason Vanessa wants her to come is so that she can get the help of the Lord Sorcier of England, a man named Lord Elias Wilder, who is, like, one of the, if not the most powerful and talented magician in the country, because Vanessa thinks if anybody can help fix Dora, then he can. And Dora and Elias end up meeting, and it does not go well at first. Elias ends up having to pretend to court her, so they can explain why they're spending a lot of time in each other's company, because Elias wants to try and, you know, fix whatever is wrong with Dora, like, try and, like, heal her, basically. And then also they end up working more together because there is this, like, sleeping sickness that is especially targeting the poor children in England, and Elias is, like, really running himself ragged trying to figure out what's going on, and nobody else seems to be that bothered by it, but Dora is. And so the two of them are trying to figure out a solution to this, and I just love this book so much. I love our main characters. Like, I am so impressed. I've said this before, but, like, the way that Olivia Atwater can write Dora in a way that, like, we can see that because of what is done to her, she doesn't process things in the same way. Like, like there are emotions that feel kind of muffled to her in comparison to other people, but we also see so clearly that she does have feelings. She does love people. She does care about people. She is so empathetic and compassionate, and I just love her so much. I also love Elias. He's like one of those characters where you first meet him and he is very abrasive. I was not a big fan of his the first time I read this book, like at the beginning, I mean. But he really, really grew on me. Like, I ended up loving him so much, and I love that as we learn more about him, we understand why he is the way he is, and it's not just like, you know, generic brooding bad boy, like, backstory. It's like, he is not only suffering from PTSD from being in the war, but he is so upset and furious and heartbroken at all of the harm and the suffering that is in the world and the people who are too polite to talk about it, and the fact that people don't seem to be doing anything about it. Like, he is also a very empathetic person, but he shows it in a very different way than Dora does. And I loved their relationship together. I loved their banter. I love the way that even when Elias is being a jerk, it's not, like, I don't hate reading it because Dora just gives it right back to him, which I love. Like, me and Hannah have compared this to a Beatrice and Benedict kind of relationship, because that's like the vibe it gives me, is like they, like that battle of wits, but they also respect each other. I love that. I also really loved the supporting characters and the way they were written. I enjoyed Vanessa. I love Albert. I love that, like, even the characters who we don't see as much still feel complex and well written, like Lady Caraway, like Miss Jennings, who is a chaperone that they end up like working with, and the way that she is not just like written off by the author, if that makes sense. I loved her as well. I love the themes of this book and the way it talks about like when so much is wrong in the world and there's so much suffering, and it can be so hard to see that and to like to not be able to fix things, or to not be able to fix everything, and to feel like there aren't enough people who care. But then this book also shows how you can do small things, you know, you can right small wrongs, and the way that that also is very important. And I love that. I love that this book also talks about the necessity and power of anger, and how sometimes being angry is the appropriate response. Like, there's a lot of talk about like the difference between being nice and being good, and the way that anger fits into that, and I loved that. I also love the writing of this series and this book. Like, I think it's the perfect balance of like humor and cleverness and whimsy, but also really heartfelt, and the way the characters are balanced with like the plot and the themes. Like, I'm getting less coherent about this book as I go on. So obviously I loved it. I also want to mention that I've seen like multiple reviewers who, like, even though they really enjoyed the book and they, you know, said the writing is very good, they point out that because this is, you know, a like British inspired historical fantasy, that like the author falls prey to like a few Americanisms that were distracting in the writing. And I just want to mention that Olivia Atwater is Canadian. So like, I mean, a lot of things are our fault, but this is not our fault. So I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, I absolutely adored this book, and I gave Half a Soul 5 stars again. I love this book so much, and I love this series so much. And if I haven't convinced you to read it yet, I don't know what else to do. Except maybe a whole series review, which I'll do after I reread the 3rd book. Next, I finished Rose in Bloom by Louisa May Alcott. This was also a buddy read with Julia and Mary Margaret, because we read both books in the series together. And this book picks up after a time jump, so like I think 4 or 5 years or something. So now Rose is a young woman, and she's dealing a lot with like expectations of her, what she wants to do with her life. She also has inherited quite a lot of money, and so she's trying to figure out how best she can use that, because she really wants to help people and do good. I also should mention that this series, any romantic things that happen are going to involve her cousins, because that's just when this book was written. So just wanted to put a warning out there for the kissing cousins trope. You kind of have to overlook that. So setting that aside, I did actually really, really love the romance in this book. If I were rating it purely on the romance, it'd be like at least a 4 or 4.5 stars, because I love the love interest so much. Like, he did a couple of things that annoyed me, but for the most part, I really adored him. Like, I love him and Rose together. I love kind of the tropes involved with his character and his relationship with her. I think they have some wonderful scenes together. I love this, like, the development of their relationship. So that was great. I also did really enjoy Rose as a character. For the most part, I found her very like understandable, very sympathetic, and very interesting. I really felt for her as she's navigating these very like messy relationships and this feeling of like, you know, what does she want to do with her life? I was also definitely emotionally invested in this book. There was laughing, crying, like giggling, there was everything. You know, squealing over how cute something was. So like there was definitely a whole range of emotions. I was, you know, very invested in this book. I also think some of the commentary was well done. Not all of it. I have conflicting feelings about that. And as I said, I actually really appreciated the complexity and the messiness of these different relationships Rose has with various characters. But there's a few like big asterisks for my thoughts on this book. First off, I do want to mention that although it's not nearly as racist as the first book, we do still definitely have like of its time elements in terms of like xenophobia and some racism and a whole lot of misogyny. I think probably even more than the first book. And like some of that was challenged and some of it wasn't. Like there are some really, really great feminist moments in this book, but then some of them seem to be completely undone by the way this book ends. And I just have very mixed feelings about that. I also really didn't like the way this huge event that happens in this book is just kind of brushed off by pretty much everyone. And I feel like we were setting up for a great character arc that like never materialized, and that really bothered me. And I also feel like the moralizing of this book, while it was less, it was less shoehorned in than in Eight Cousins, in a way, I don't know if I want to say it frustrated me more, but it was still very frustrating in this book because not only was it sometimes like, you know, beating you over the head with it, but there were things that I actively disagreed with that this book was communicating. So like, I don't know, I am very much of two minds for this book because there were parts of it I loved. I'm very glad I read these. I definitely wouldn't be opposed to reading them again. Like I could see myself rereading these books, you know, and like I said, I loved some of the character stuff and the relationship stuff. I can't believe I actually picked the right love interest. I love this for me. And like some character work and some of the themes were done really, really well, but there are some big issues I had with the way this book dealt with other things. Some of the character choices, some of the messages of the story, they make me so angry. And I can't tell like how much, like which parts of this book were supposed to weight more heavily as like the themes or the messages, you know? So I gave Rose and Bloom like 3.75 stars. I don't know, I'm just very conflicted, but I am very glad I finally read it, and I would definitely read it again. Then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is Unsettled by Reem Faruqi. This is a novel in verse, and we're following our main character Noura, who moves with her family from Pakistan to Georgia. This is obviously a big adjustment for her. There's a good chunk of this book that deals with the way, you know, the racism and the xenophobia she faces from people, as well as Islamophobia, but it's also just about, it's very slice of life. It's also about Noura's like family life. We do see Noura start to make friends, which is lovely, and Noura also really loves swimming, and so we see her working really hard to get better. Like she does join the swim team, and she's struggling because her brother also does swim, and it's always come much easier to him than to Noura. Like he's always praised for being like a prodigy at it basically, and Noura really loves it, but she doesn't have that kind of instinctive talent for it. She has to work for it a lot more. And I ended up enjoying this. The first half or so I wasn't as engaged because like I thought it was fine, but I really wasn't a fan of the writing style. Like the verse style for this book didn't do a lot for me. But I thought there were interesting aspects of the book. I wasn't having a bad time or anything. But I feel like the second half is really where things picked up for me because there are some specific like characterization things that happen and the way some plot lines were handled. I ended up being very invested and liking the way those were done in the second half of the book. And I also think that we got a lot more character development as well in the second half of the book, because that was another thing, is I felt like some of the characterization felt a little flat. Even characters that we were supposed to, I think, be invested in, you know, and have strong feelings for. And by the end of the book, I think that happened a lot more. So even though I still didn't love the writing style of this one, I did end up enjoying this, and I gave Unsettled 4 stars. Okay, everybody, so those are all of the books I read in the second part of the month. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought of them. Let me know if you're going to pick any of these up. Let me know a book that you loved recently. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!